Snoop Dogg has responded to some of the backlash he's received over his LGBTQ plus comments.
Snoop Dogg, when will you stop disappointing me?
But have y'all seen what's trending about Snoop?
Late breaking news, Snoop Dogg has apologized, but I don't think he should have.
Well, my grandson in the middle of the movie like, Papa Snoop, how she have a baby with a woman? She a woman. Oh, I didn't come in for this shit. I just came to watch the goddamn movie. Hey, man, watch the movie.
And the
to us LGBTQIA+
community was up in arms over that. And at first, Snoop just didn't respond to the backlash, which I think the community took as Snoop's way of saying that he didn't care about the lizzles, the gizzles, the bizzles, the trizzles, or the quizzles, my nizzle. And I'm gonna be honest when I say that I too was disappointed in Snoop, but not because of anything to do with homophobia. I was disappointed in Snoop because Snoop is a black man from Compton. And if there's anybody that should be able to come up with an excuse for a fatherless household, it's a black man from Compton. I kid, but really though. Also, I think Snoop kind of choked because he could have just told his grandson.
I heard she was a Frisco date.
All kidding aside though, what I am gonna say is the LGBTQ fatigue is real. And I'm also gonna say, I don't know when we as the LGBT community went from being on the outside of society to now the morality police. What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. All right, so I wanted to talk about this Snoop situation, but then the thing happened with the mass shooting, and I wasn't going to talk about it, but then Snoop apologized, or sort of apologized, and this is what Snoop had to say. I was just caught off guard and had no answer for my grandson, he wrote. All my gay friends know what's up. They've been calling me with love. My bad for not knowing the answer for a 6-year-old. Teach me how to learn. I'm not perfect. And while many are saying that that's not a good enough apology or an apology at all, I personally think Snoop gave these people more than they deserved. So let's watch this clip and kind of break down what exactly everybody was so up in arms about and where I'm at on it. Before we go any further, I'm just gonna ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. We're on our way to 100,000 subscribers, currently at 90,000. Thank you all very much. When you hit the subscribe button, make sure you click the bell and select all notifications so that you know every time I upload. Let's get into it.
Uncle Snoop is not my uncle. So right now, Snoop Dogg is getting canceled, right?
Which is debatable. It's kind of hard to cancel somebody that's worth $160 million. And I know that The Voice had to have an emergency meeting with Snoop.
He's on the show The Voice, and apparently The Voice execs held a crisis talk with Snoop Dogg, and they were furious over his homophobic comments.
But Snoop's also scheduled to perform for the final match for AFL in Australia. And there was also a member of parliament that spoke out against Snoop performing there. But that turned out to be nothing as well, because the AFL chief already came out and said that he stands behind Snoop and that Snoop will do a great job. But all of that aside, like I said, Snoop is worth over $100 million. So you can't really cancel him. Yeah, you can get mad at him. Yeah, you can protest and maybe get on his nerves a little bit because he's having to deal with the people from the AFL, or because he's having to deal with the studio execs over at The Voice. But really, all of this can only affect Snoop's life so much because he's a very successful person and he really doesn't need anything from any of you anymore. So when everybody's trying to be like, we're gonna cancel Snoop, canceling Snoop is a lot like canceling J.K. Rowling. Neither of them really care because both of them are worth millions, if not billions, when it comes to JK of dollars or pounds.
Snoop Dogg is a legend. He's a legend. He's a West Coast legend. Okay, he's done a lot for hip hop. He's done more in this life than I ever will. He has more money than I'll ever stack. Let's just get that out of the way right now.
And I just want to chime in really quick to say that this is something that I truly do not understand. All of these unsuccessful people have a lot of opinions about what successful people are doing or have done. Snoop has used his habit of saying grimy things or living a grimy lifestyle to elevate his entire family money and live a life where he doesn't really have to worry about a lot of other people. While you sit in front of a green screen on TikTok having opinions about people that have reached heights that you will likely never reach. So how about we slow down with all the judgment?
But basically, right now he's getting canceled for saying something really stupid about gay people on a podcast.
Okay, I hate to remind everybody, but I myself am gay. I know it's a shock and I should have warned you or at least told you to sit down, but I myself am gay. And I did not look at this as Snoop saying anything stupid about gay people or really even anything about gay people at all. And that's not even why people are mad. The real reason that people are mad at Snoop Dogg, even though a lot of people don't want to admit it, is they're still mad at Snoop because he performed for Trump's inauguration and he hasn't apologized for it and he doesn't care. And that's what people are really mad about. Like I saw one woman talking about this on TikTok where she was saying they were just considering inviting Snoop back into the fold.
Just when we thought it might have been safe to let your ass back into the fold.
And that's what the left really can't accept, is that most people don't want to be part of the fold when it comes to the left. You are not the cool kids anymore. And I remember when you were, back then, I was on the left. But then at a point, the left just completely lost their minds. And now the left is known more for language policing and cancel culture than anything else. So what's really to miss? But let's talk about how we got introduced to Snoop and what Snoop Dogg is really known for. We were all introduced to Snoop as a gangster rapper. That's what Snoop originally was considered. That's the category he falls into. Snoop himself has since been Disneyfied, but I think that was really because the industry wanted so badly to find a place for Snoop more than Snoop actually changing who he was to fit that mold. Technically, Snoop never fit that mold. Like one of the first big controversies for Snoop was he was accused of 187, but not only was he accused of red rum, he also had a song called Murder Was the Case. He performed that song at the VMAs while he was standing trial for unaliving another person. For a lot of people, that wasn't even a blip in Snoop's history. Everybody just kept right on singing and dancing along with Uncle Snoop. Then, speaking of the VMAs, there was also the year that he showed up. I think it was 2002 that he showed up with 2 women on leashes. He also was a big part of the popularization of pimp lifestyle that he was also very open about. At a point, he was on the cover of Rolling Stone and they described him as America's most lovable pimp. He also cheated on his wife, allegedly. That was written about in a book, I believe from Corinne Steffens was where that came from, otherwise known as Superhead. She talked about Snoop Dogg being one of her conquests, but it is kind of well known, or at least assumed, that Snoop has cheated on his wife a lot. Nobody cared about that either. In both 2005 and 2022, Snoop Dogg faced 2 separate SA allegations. But nobody really seemed to care about that. Snoop is and always has been very well known for smoking weed. Some people claim to have moral opposition against that, and in some states that's still illegal. Nobody seems to care about that either. Hanging out with Suge Knight. He was hanging out with Suge Knight after the passing of Tupac, and when you could say Suge Knight was at his worst, and we all knew how terrible of a person Suge Knight was. Nobody seemed to have a problem with that. And I don't bring any of this up to shame or discount Snoop on any level. I say this to make the point that nobody cared about any of this. And I don't know when everybody turned so holier than thou after being fine with it for so many years. Oh, that's right. It's because, like I said, nobody cared about any of this until he performed for Donald Trump. And really, that's what bothers all of these people, is that not only did Snoop perform for Donald Trump, but he doesn't care how you feel about it. And if you didn't know about any of the accusations or any of Snoop's actual history, but suddenly now you're pretending to care, maybe you're being fake right now, because if that really was a concern to you, you probably would have looked into all of this a long time ago.
He was talking about the movie Lightyear by Pixar, which has like a brief scene of a lesbian couple kissing. Like, it's very tame.
Actually, Snoop didn't even bring up the lesbian couple kissing. I didn't find out about the lesbian couple kissing because I haven't seen Lightyear until I saw this guy talking about it. But before that, I didn't know. What Snoop actually talked about was having to explain how the 2 women had a baby together.
They move on into the space years. They move down the line. They're like, that she had a baby with a woman. Well, my grandson in the middle of the movie like, Papa Snoop, how she have a baby with a woman? She a woman.
And to me, again, this has less to do with any kind of homophobia and more to do with how curious children are and how we as adults aren't always ready to answer their questions. Because anybody that's ever spent any amount of time with children knows that sometimes them and their questions will throw you for a loop. And on this part, I 100% get Snoop. Because I remember a time when my niece was very young. She had to be 5 or 6 years old. We're hanging out, and a Viagra commercial came on TV. I don't know if you guys remember the Viagra commercials, but I certainly do. So my niece asked me, "DOT, what's Viagra?" And I'll never forget what I said because I was so proud of the way that I handled it. I looked my niece right in her little baby eyes, and I said, "Little girl, get away from me." I panicked. I didn't know how to handle that question. Children will throw you off. And to me, if Snoop had really been homophobic, he probably would have brought up the kiss rather than bringing up the part about the two women having a baby together. So that's what leads me to believe that it was probably just one of those moments for Snoop, like the moment I had with my niece, where you just freeze and kind of halfway panic and then are like, okay, let's leave this one alone. And I saw a bunch of people saying that Snoop could have just said that adoption was how they ended up with that baby. And that does make sense. But again, when you go into a moment where you panic because this child asks you a question that you're not ready to answer, and you're thinking with your adult brain, I think that also is where we run into trouble. And I think that even though people are saying that Snoop didn't offer an apology, basically what he said was, tell me how to say what I'm supposed to say. And I think that this is where LGBT, if they weren't always in such a hurry to get their feelings hurt, could have a teachable moment and be like, okay, maybe this is what I would have said or the way that I would have handled it, instead of right away jumping the defensive and calling Snoop homophobic, which is going to get you absolutely nowhere with anybody. Because if you haven't noticed, people are tired of hearing about homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, fat phobia, whatever your phobia is, people are tired of hearing about it because it's not even valid most of the time. There's nothing homophobic about what he said. He was just saying that he got stumped by a kid. Are you smarter than a 5th grader? Snoop Dogg was not smarter than a 5th grader in this situation. And I don't even think that kid was a 5th grader. I think it was a baby. So it's just one of those situations where you have to accept that every once in a while a person's going to be a human being and they're not going to be thinking the way that gay people think and just like, oh, well, it was adoption, clearly, and then tell the kid that, and then the kid's going to be like, what's adoption? And you're going to be like, I don't want to have this conversation. I just want to enjoy the movie.
Even by like kids movie standards, it's insane. And basically Snoop's reaction to it is like, yo, why are they forcing it on us? Like, yo, I'm scared to go to the movies now. Like how am I supposed to explain this to my kids?
He didn't even say it like that. He said it in the fun Snoop Dogg way.
So it's like, I'm scared to go to the movies now. Like, y'all throwing me in the middle of shit that I don't have an answer for. It threw me for a loop. These are kids that we have to show that at this age, like,
that part.
they're going to ask questions.
Yeah.
They are going to ask, I don't have the answer.
Is that not relatable? And this guy has to relay it in a way like Snoop was talking like the sun was in his eyes. Why do they have to force this on us? He never even used the term forced on them. And yes, I think words do matter when you're trying to make a person sound a particular way, because the way that he said it was very relatable. And like I said, something a lot of us can understand. And that's something that I think the studio should maybe be a little more aware of. If you're going to put the parents who take the children, or the grandparents, or the uncles and aunts who take the children in an uncomfortable situation because they may have to talk about something that maybe either they don't want to talk about, they're not ready to talk about, or it's not their place to talk about, then it's going to make people think twice about whether or not they want to take children to children's movies, especially in the theater. And I saw a report that Marlon Wayans, who has a trans daughter, so if he had actually said what they reported that he said, it would make sense, but it turned out he didn't. Like what they were reporting that Marlon Wayans had said was, I'm tired of defending this N-word. I defended him on his criminal the Gayle King situation, and I took heat for defending him online when he performed for Trump. But this crosses the line. Sooner or later, you just realize someone has issues. There ain't no Hollywood agenda to turn kids gay. That's the dumbest I've ever heard. Disney characters lie, steal, cheat, kill, poison, and everything, and don't nobody say it's an agenda to turn their kids into a piece of shit. I watched Snow White when I was a kid, and I ain't gave a poison apple yet. But as soon as a gay character pop up, it's an agenda. The agenda is to make your kids empathetic, not gay. White people acted the same way when black people started being seen on TV. And that was attributed to Marlon Wayans, but it turned out Marlon Wayans hadn't said that. What Marlon Wayans said in regards to that, though, was, "Not real, never said this. I love at Snoop Dogg. I'd never let the world have this personal conversation without talking directly to my bro. Stop with the false information." And I wouldn't think Marlon Wayans would say that anyway, because Marlon Wayans has been in Hollywood long enough and comes from a Hollywood enough family to know that Disney, nor the rest of the movie industry, is about teaching anybody empathy. What they're about is making money. So while some of this stuff may be wrapped up in their stories, in my opinion, they definitely are not trying to teach empathy. What they're trying to do is make money. And the reason that I think the LGBTQ message was included in Lightyear, which was in 2002, was because that's what was making money at the time. Everybody was trying to be super sensitive to LGBT. Everybody was talking about representation. So Pixar wanted to make those politically correct dollars. Turns out people really don't like that stuff. Everybody's over having LGBT shoved in their faces all the time. And sometimes people just want to turn off and watch a movie, especially when you go to see a children's movie. You don't want a lot of that stuff thrown at you, not only for the reasons that I said, but also because sometimes you just don't want to think about anything. That's the fun of watching children's movies with children sometimes, is that a lot of times it is cute, and when it comes down to it, it is just about a fairy tale or a story, and you can just get lost in that. A lot of times when you watch movies with the little ones, you just want to shut off with them and enjoy a little time where they're occupied and their mouths are shut. So the last thing you need is these movies stirring up questions in these little people that you probably don't want to even talk to at that moment.
And honestly, like, this is an argument that you definitely heard in your life from someone that's homophobic. It's like, oh, like, how do I explain this to my kids? I just felt the need to make this video because of how I found out how Snoop Dogg even existed. The first time that I ever saw Snoop Dogg, he was doing like a red carpet event where he had like two girls like on a dog leash. And I was like 6 years old, like watching this like award show. And I literally had to ask my mom to explain it to me. It's like, why are these two women on a leash like an animal?
Okay, so I went ahead and looked it up. That was in 2003. This guy says he was 6 years old at that time, so that tells us he's 29, which kind of tells you why these people come at it the way they come at it. And that's because a lot of times when you're in your 20s, you still don't understand that what you're doing in your 20s, sometimes you'll decide wasn't necessarily the best idea or isn't something that you would do now. And the fact that he tries to make it seem like this is Snoop being inconsistent and not just possibly growing and evolving and seeing things as a grandfather at this point, or after having been a father and seeing what that experience was like, lets me know that this guy really has no life experience. And it also lets me know that he's never hung out with gangbangers, because I personally am related to gangbangers. Not proud of it, not ashamed of it either. It just is what it is. And one thing you notice about gangbangers is a lot of times their children are very, very sheltered because the parents have lived these lives where they know how hard and how terrible the world can be because that's the world that they occupied. And so they decide when they make money or get out of that lifestyle that they're going to try to keep their children far, far away from that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Snoop Dogg's grandchildren are definitely not seeing any of Papa Snoop's stuff from when he was younger and probably don't know him as anything but their grandfather. They probably just know him as Papa Snoop. Like, I just went ahead and looked that up too. Snoop is 53 years old now. So does it make sense that Snoop's thinking at 53 might be different than it was at 31? And that maybe the stuff that he did back then, he wouldn't necessarily want his grandchildren seeing now?
So I just think it's so funny that people are saying that gay people are constantly putting like perverted stuff on them and exposing their children to it.
I don't really think a lot of people are saying that right now. I think people are just saying that some of this stuff isn't what they want to talk about with their children.
When like people do that with straight stuff all the time too, right? You realize that. And normally, I'd be like, okay, like, Snoop is just old school. Like, he's like from my dad's generation, like, whatever. But then I realized that he's actually a traitor to the black community and just his people in general. Like, Snoop Dogg is a Trump supporter. Like, he is friends with Donald Trump. He's like, performed at his inauguration events. Like, he very much is aligned with Republicans. And as cool as it would be to vibe out with Snoop Dogg and smoke with Snoop Dogg and show Snoop Dogg some of my music, like, I would never do that because at the end of the day, he's a traitor to us. He's a foe. Like, he's a villain in disguise, yo. Like, he has awful beliefs, okay? His music hasn't been good since his first album.
Well, I never heard of you. And you're talking about how it would be nice to hang out with Snoop and vibe and have him hear your music, smoke with him. What makes you think that Snoop would ever want to do any of those things with you in the first place? That's the thing that always gets me about these people, is they're always turning down experiences and situations that nobody would ever offer them. Snoop would never want to hang out with a nerd like you. Look at yourself. You're a ridiculous looking person. You don't even look like you'd be fun to hang out with. And listening to you talk, you would be a constant wet blanket. I can tell, and all that was like a 1.5-minute clip of you talking, and I feel exhausted from listening to your mouth being like, oh, the way that people feel about this and the way that people... Your music sucks, and I'm sure of it. But just like I said, it's not really anything to do with LGBT. LGBT and homophobia is just the excuse to give a hard time to a person that you don't agree with the politics of, or what you assume to be the politics of. Because Snoop has never actually come out and said that he voted for Donald Trump. He performed at the inauguration, which I'm sure he got paid for. And I'm tired of hearing people talk about that like it's a stupid idea too, because whether or not you like it, that is a person that's from Compton and overcame a lot to perform for the President of the United States of America. And that is the kind of thing that, whatever your opinion about it is, will go down in history books. And this is people of color actually elevating. So when people of color are always talking about how they would like to have a seat at the table and nobody ever wants to allow them to have a seat at the table, that is a seat at the table. That's what a seat at the table means. So while you may not like the person that's sitting at the head of the table, meaning the current president, Donald Trump, that definitely is a black person actually elevating to the point where they're able to perform at inauguration, which I know has happened in the past. But every time it happens, it makes it a little easier for another person of color to perform at an event like that. Also, when it comes to LGBT, Snoop even bringing this up is doing the LGBT community a favor, because if we're trying to see where people are when it comes to LGBT and LGBT representation, that means we're also going to have to figure out what kind of LGBT representation is the kind that's going to accomplish the goal, which the goal is to integrate into everyday society and be seen like anybody else. And guess what? At the beginning of any integration process, which we are still somewhat at the beginning of the integration for LGBT, it is good for us to know where we are and exactly where people are with us. And I think that anytime people are being honest with you, that's when you can get the best idea of exactly where you need to be, maybe where you need to be correcting, maybe where you need to adjust. And here's something that I'm going to say that may bother the older people as well, is that eventually the world's going to evolve to a point where none of this is going to matter anyway. Everything is just going to be what it is because everybody's starting to blend more and more in the world and everybody's becoming more and more open-minded. So being able to understand where the older generation is, like Snoop, even like myself in certain cases, I think is helpful for dealing with the world that we're currently living in. But at the same time, in the future, all of this will be a non-issue anyway. So I don't know why people have such trouble understanding that certain people will think differently from you. And at certain points, some people will express that. Also, it was a podcast. And when you're a guest on a podcast, the point of being a guest is to be interesting, is to be entertaining, is to be fun, and hopefully get clicks for that particular podcast. And I would say that from this clip, Snoop Dogg has done all of those things. But when it comes down to it, I honestly do feel in my heart of hearts that nothing that Snoop Dogg said was wrong. Nothing Snoop Dogg said was homophobic. and nothing Snoop Dogg said was anything that the average person can on some level relate to. But anyway, that's where I'm at on it. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. If you want to see a video of me talking about the mass shooter in Minneapolis and the fact that it appears that he seemed trapped in trans, click the link on your screen. Other than that, as always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.